The Moon Court had been arranged for judgment, not for trial. Judgment. There was a difference, and Elara knew it the moment she was escorted through the iron doors and saw how the room had been prepared. The witness chairs were already filled. Every noble house with any claim to council influence had sent someone. The pack elders from the eastern and southern territories sat in the second row with expressions that suggested they had already made up their minds and were here to observe the formality of it. Lord Veyron stood at the center table with a stack of documents so precise in their arrangement that Elara understood someone had spent time making sure the evidence looked authoritative before she arrived. She was pale. She had been pale for 3 weeks. The black marks on the backs of her hands had spread from her knuckles to her wrists, which was new, and she had been hiding them under her sleeves because she knew what they looked like to people who did not understand what they were. She stood straight. She had decided, somewhere between the guards appearing at her door and arriving in this chamber, that the one thing she could control was her posture. Everything else had already been decided by other people. Ronan was on the throne. He was exhausted in the way he had been exhausted for 4 months, the specific fatigue of a man whose connection to his kingdom was fraying, and who had been trying to command his way past it instead of asking why. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything. She thought about the morning 3 years ago when he had placed the silver Luna crown on her head with hands that shook slightly and told her the kingdom had not had a Luna who came from the lower ranks in a generation. She had thought then that was a reason for hope. She understood now it was also a reason for this room. Veyron began. He said the pack link instability had been traced to the Luna's contact with lower-ranked wolves. He said the Alpha King's command had fractured on 3 separate occasions immediately following the Luna's healing sessions. He said the black marks on her hands were evidence of power absorption, that she had been pulling strength from the pack link and transferring it away from the Alpha bloodline. He said she was draining the kingdom. He set the documents on the floor with the deliberate care of a man presenting proof he had manufactured. Elara watched him and thought, he knows I can read these. He is also counting on everyone else in this room being unable to. The court healer, a man called Saren, who Elara had never trusted since she caught him adjusting records 2 years ago, confirmed the findings. His eyes did not meet hers. That told her everything. Veyron looked at the throne. He looked at Ronan. He said, the Luna crown carries a taint that must be surrendered before the corruption spreads further into the Alpha command. He did not ask Ronan to do anything. He had learned, over 11 years as council head, that the most effective way to make an Alpha King do something was to create a situation in which the action felt inevitable. The room felt inevitable. Ronan raised his head. He looked not at Elara, but at a point on the wall behind her, the way people look when they are about to say something they cannot look directly at. He said, kneel and surrender the Luna crown. Elara went very still inside herself. She measured the room. She measured Veyron's expression, satisfied, waiting, the particular satisfaction of someone watching a mechanism they built complete its function. She measured the court elders, some uncertain, some already decided. She measured the guards on both sides, who had escorted her in and were now not looking at her. She measured Ronan. She measured the man she had spent 3 years standing beside in hallways, in healing wings, in border councils at 2 a.m. when the patrol reports were bad. The man who had told her once, quietly, that her instincts about lower wolves were the most reliable thing in his kingdom. He was not looking at her. She looked at him directly and said, If I kneel, remember who asked me to carry the kingdom lower than my own dignity." Then she knelt. Her knees touched the cold black stone of the moon court floor. She reached up and removed the silver Luna crown from her head. She held it for one moment. Then she placed it on the floor in front of her. The crown touched the stone. It turned black. Every torch in the moon court went out simultaneously, as if the darkness had been waiting for exactly this moment to announce itself. The pack link went silent. Not quiet, silent. The particular silence of a connection that has been severed. Elara heard it happen. The absence of sound where there had always been the murmur of 5,000 wolves' emotional presence, their grief and loyalty and small daily fears that she had been absorbing for 3 years, and none of them had ever known. In the dark, someone screamed. 2 wolves made sounds that were not quite words. A chair fell over. Ronan's voice, when it came, was human. Only human, no alpha weight, no pack resonance. Just a man's voice in a dark room calling a name. Elara. She rose. She had been kneeling. She chose to stop kneeling. She picked up the black crown. No one moved to stop her. The nobles sat very still. The court elders exchanged looks that were, she noticed, more frightened than certain. Veyron had gone pale. She understood what he was seeing. He had expected the crown to do nothing. He had expected her humiliation to be simple and final and useful. He had not expected a relic. She walked out of the moon court with the black crown in her hands, while Veyron was still trying to find the right phrase to make what had just happened sound controllable. The court did not recover quickly. In the chaos of darkness and the stunned silence of the pack link, Elara walked through the moon court doors while Veyron was still shouting, and Ronan was still trying to issue commands that no wolf could feel through the connection that had just gone numb. She did not run. There was no point. If they wanted to drag her back, they could. But wolves do not move easily towards something that has just watched the Luna crown change color, and everyone in that hall needed a moment to decide what they believed before they decided what to do. She got to the corridor. She got to the healing wing. She closed the door. She set the black crown on the table and looked at her hands for a long time. The black marks were deeper now. She had expected that. When you carry corruption from a pack link and you are severed from the stabilizing connection that allowed you to vent it safely, the corruption has nowhere to go but inward. She sat with that for a moment. Then she began to take her records out of the chest under the table. Behind her, she heard Ronan's footsteps in the corridor. He stopped outside the door. She said, without turning, "You wanted proof only after punishment." A pause. "I know," he said. His voice sounded wrong, smaller than she was used to. An alpha voice stripped of pack resonance sounded like any other man's voice. "Come back to the court." "No." Another pause. "Elara, I need to understand." She turned. He was standing in the doorway. He looked wrong in the way of a man who had just discovered that a load-bearing wall was missing and could not yet comprehend why the ceiling had not fallen. He kept reaching, she realized. Every few seconds his expression would shift, as though he was attempting to push his authority through the pack link and finding nothing on the other side. Like someone pressing a hand to a wound that is no longer there and not understanding the absence, she said, "You cannot hear them. Not a question." He shook his head. "Not one. Not Border Patrol? No. Not your wolf?" He hesitated. "It is there," he said, quietly, "as if it is waiting for something," she said. "Then you have one problem." She looked at him steadily. "You do not miss me yet. You miss what I held together." She closed the door. She listened to him stand there for a few minutes before his footsteps retreated. She sat beside the black crown and let herself feel the silence in the pack link and understood, for the first time with her whole body rather than her mind, that she had been carrying that silence for a very long time and calling it devotion. She allowed herself exactly 10 minutes to feel that. Then she opened the records. The records were in the old Healing Wing archive. She had been keeping them since the second month after the Eastern Border campaign. 347 lower-ranked wolves. Soldiers who could not sleep without their wolves, clawing at their own ribs. Sentries whose hands shook every time they heard a command tone. Pups in the lower territories who had started crying when the pack link carried alpha frequency. Widows whose grief had been sealed by something that had no business being in a grief channel. She had been tracking the pattern for months. She had learned early on that the corruption was not random and not natural. It moved along the same pathways every time, the emergency command routes that had been activated during the border war and had never been deactivated. Command had been flowing through those routes continuously since the war ended. Command without purpose. Command with no one left to obey it. But the routes were still open, and in an open command route, unused authority does not vanish. It pools. It ferments. It becomes something that is not quite a command, and not quite grief, and not quite rage. It becomes the thing she had been absorbing for months and calling a headache when people asked why she looked tired. Healer Auriel arrived that evening. Auriel looked at the records. She looked at Elara's hands. She said what Elara already knew. "Your body is absorbing it." "I know," Elara said. "Every black mark is a command wound you pulled from someone else," Elara said. "If Ronan knew, he would have tried to carry it alone." Auriel looked at her, "And now they call your silence guilt." Elara set down the record she had been holding. She had no answer to that because it was exactly accurate. She had been silent to protect Ronan's authority. She had been silent to protect the lower wolves from the attention that truth would bring. She had been silent because she knew what happened to lower-rank Luna healers, who said that something in the Alpha Command structure was causing harm. They were called too sensitive. They were called dangerous. They were called power thieves. And eventually they were called into a chamber with their knees on the floor and a relic turning black in their hands. On the 4th day after the kneeling, Ronan came to the healing wing again. This time he did not try to command her. He stood in the doorway and said, "I need to understand," she said. "No, you need your wolves back." He flinched. She could see it was true, and she could see he knew it was true, and she watched him absorb that particular shape of truth. That he had come for the wolves first, and that he could not lie about it. She told him to sit down. He sat. She showed him the records. He read them without speaking. When he reached the 3rd page, he said, "I did not know about any of this," she said. "I know." "That is part of the problem," he said. "Why didn't you tell me?" She said, "Because you would have tried to fix it with commands." He was quiet. She asked him about the border war. She asked specifically about emergency command activation. His expression told her he recognized the phrase, but had not known it was still running. Veyron said it was standard procedure during Reconstruction, he said. Elara set down a document in front of him. It was a summary of the War Command Binding Protocol. It had his seal at the bottom. He stared at it for a long time. She watched him arrive at the same place she had arrived at 6 months ago, when she first understood that the corruption was not an accident. It was infrastructure. Someone had built it, and they had built it using his name. She said, "You asked why I did not tell you." She looked at the seal. I was trying to find proof you had not signed it willingly. He looked up. She met his eyes. I believe you did not know, she said. That does not change what it did. He reached for her blackened hand. She withdrew it. He stopped. He said, May I see what it cost you? She considered that for a moment. Then she placed both hands on the table where he could look at them, not offering, allowing him to see. He looked at the black marks for a long time without speaking. Then he said, This is my authority rotting out of someone else's skin, she said. Yes. He said nothing. She left the records with him and went to check on the lower wolves. 3 days before the trial, she overextended. She had been absorbing corruption for 11 weeks. She had been careful about how much she took in at once. Careful the way you are careful with a wound you cannot quite keep from getting worse. Careful with the specific discipline of someone who knows there is no one else available to do what she is doing. But there was a wave through the pack link that evening that was worse than the previous ones. A broad activation across 4 lower territories that Veyron had apparently triggered as a demonstration of what he could do with emergency authority. She felt it happen. She felt the wolves freeze. She felt their grief lock down, felt their wolves press to the inside of their ribs and find no room. She absorbed as much as she could. She collapsed outside the archive room. Ronan found her. He did not command her. He did not reach for her without permission. He knelt beside her on the floor and said, What do you need? She said. Help me sit up, then leave me alone for 20 minutes. He helped her sit up. He stayed just outside the door for 20 minutes without speaking. When he came back in, he looked at the black crown on the table. He looked at the way it sat there, recording everything with its dark surface. He said, You are not the place my kingdom gets to hide its pain. She looked at him. He said it like someone who had heard a sentence he had been failing to say for a very long time. She said, No, I am not. They sat with that for a moment. He said, How do I stop it? She said, You cannot command it away. She looked at him steadily. It was built on command. He understood what that meant. He sat with it for a long time, he said. Then what do I do? She said. You confess it. He looked at the records. He looked at the black crown. He said, Before the trial, yes. And if the court does not believe me, she said, then we lose the trial and you live with what you chose. He left. She heard him stop in the corridor before his footsteps carried him toward the council chambers. She sat beside the black crown and thought about what she was going to carry into the Blood Moon trial, and what she was finally going to set down. Lord Veyron moved before Elara had finished documenting the next wave of cases. He called a Blood Moon trial. He declared the Black Crown itself was spreading rebellion. He claimed Elara had been building a counterpack among lower-ranked wolves, using her healing position to create loyalty that bypassed Alpha Command. He presented the records she had been keeping as evidence of conspiracy. He did it publicly, before 3-pack elder witnesses, which made it very difficult for Ronan to dismiss quietly. Elara heard about it from Oriel, who came to the healing wing with the particular expression of someone delivering news they had been hoping to not need to deliver. Elara set down her pen. She had known it was coming. She had known it since the night Veyron watched her place the black crown on the floor, and his expression had shifted from satisfied to calculating. He had expected humiliation. He had gotten a witness that could be put on trial. She went through her records that evening, not to prepare arguments, to count 347 cases. She would bring all of them, every name, every date, every command wound she had absorbed and logged and carried home in her skin. She was not going to walk into that court and plead innocence. She was going to walk in and lay down proof. Lady Marielle came to the healing wing 2 days before the trial. She came without attendants, which was unusual. She said, "Luna's purpose is to strengthen the Alpha's command." Elara set down her pen. "Strengthen it for whom?" Marielle looked at her. "For the kingdom," she said. "The lower wolves are the kingdom," Elara said. "The soldiers who cannot sleep are the kingdom. The pups who cry when the command frequency rises are the kingdom. If your strengthening requires me to not hear them, what exactly are you strengthening?" Marielle did not have an answer. She left. She came back an hour later. She had been to the lower guard barracks. She had seen a young soldier convulse when council drums triggered old battle frequencies. She sat down across from Elara without speaking. After a while, she said, "Veyron prepared my Luna contract before the accusation was filed." She set it on the table between them. Elara looked at the date. "I know," she said. "Will you testify?" Marielle was quiet for a long moment, then she said, "Tell me what to say. Tell them what you saw," Elara said. "I cannot shape testimony." "Then tell me what I should have asked earlier." Elara looked at her. "Ask who the silence serves," she said, "and who paid for it." Ronan came to her the night before the trial. He said he had prepared a revocation of the accusation. He said he could restore her Luna status privately before the trial began. She looked at him. She said, "You made me kneel before the kingdom. You do not get to raise me in a hallway." He stood there for a moment. He said, "I know." She said, "Tomorrow you will say it where they can hear you." He said, "What if they do not believe me?" She said, "Then we will lose the trial, and you will have to live with what you chose." She turned back to her records. He left. She heard him stop in the corridor for a moment before his footsteps carried him away. She sat beside the black crown and thought about what she was going to carry into that courtroom and what she was going to set down. The evening before the trial, it got worse. Veyron activated War Command binding across 3 lower-ranked territories. She felt it happen. A wave through the pack link, like a lock being turned from outside. Wolves across the kingdom froze mid-step. She heard it through the healing channel she had kept open. She heard lower wolves go rigid. She heard children stop mid-cry. She heard soldiers' wolves press against their ribs and find no room. She opened the door of the healing wing. Ronan was already in the corridor. He had felt it too. He had felt it as absence, as the place where his command should have reached, and found nothing but his own voice bouncing back. He said, "I cannot release it," she said, "because this was never obedience." She looked at the black crown, which had begun to pulse faintly silver in the dark. "It was a cage wearing your voice." He looked at his own hands. He said, "How do I stop it?" she said. "You cannot command it away." She looked at him steadily. "It was built on command." He understood. He said very quietly, "What do I confess?" She looked at him. "Tomorrow," she said. "Say what you told me," he said, in front of the court. "Yes," he said, "and if it costs me the throne," she said. "Then you were a king whose authority required a Luna to absorb poison in silence, and that king's reign ending is not the worst outcome for the kingdom." He looked at her for a long time. Then he nodded. He went back to his chambers. She sat beside the black crown until the pack-link pulses from the 3 locked territories faded, slowly, incompletely, the way things fade when you stop adding force, but have not yet removed the source. She thought about what it meant to be the thing that filtered pain that no one else would name. She thought about what it meant to choose not to be that thing anymore. She thought about the difference between carrying and protecting. She had been carrying the kingdom's pain. She had been doing it because she loved the wolves who were suffering. But carrying had become hiding, and hiding had become complicity. Tomorrow she was going to set it down. Not because Ronan was ready to pick it up, but because the alternative was dying quietly in a healing wing, with black marks up to her elbows, while the system that was killing everyone else kept running. The Blood Moon trial was held under red moonlight. The court had been arranged the same way as the humiliation, the same witnesses, the same nobles, the same pack elders in the second row. But the hall felt different, charged with the specific tension of an outcome that was no longer as certain as Veyron had planned. Veyron presented evidence. The pattern of Ronan's command fracturing near Elara. The black marks on her hands, enlarged in a council illustration. The lower wolves gathered around the healing wing. The secret records Elara had been keeping. He presented them as rebellion. He said the black crown was the mark of a corrupt Luna and must be melted before it spread disobedience through the lower ranks. Elara let him finish. She let every syllable land. Then she said, "I kept records because you kept graves." The court was very quiet. She placed her hands on the table. 347 lower-ranked wolves, soldiers who cannot sleep, pups who cry when alpha frequency rises, widows whose grief was sealed by a protocol that had no business touching a grief channel. She looked at the pack elders. "I kept records because someone had to, and because someone had made sure that someone was not going to be anyone else." Auriel stepped forward. She had attended enough court proceedings to know exactly how to accost bis in one. Calmly, without asking for permission, she said, "The marks on her hands are absorbed command wounds." She said it plainly. The way healers say the things they have confirmed through examination rather than assumption. She was not draining the king. She was filtering the wound he ruled through. Captain Dane rose from the witnesses. He said, "We obeyed because your voice told us to." He looked at the court. "We suffered because no one was allowed to answer." Marielle stepped forward and placed her contract on the council table. The date was visible from the third row. She said, "Veyron prepared this document before the accusation was filed." She said it the way she had said everything since deciding to tell the truth, without embellishment. "I am telling you what I know. You may decide what to do with it." Veyron had been watching all of this with the expression of a man recalculating. He reached for his last instrument. He activated full war command binding in the moon court itself. Wolves collapsed. Pack elders clutched their chests. 2 guards went rigid mid-step. A young counselor fell to his knees against his will. Ronan tried to override it. He had been slowly rebuilding his packlink connection with Auriel's help. He opened his alpha channel and pushed everything he had. Nothing answered. The command was running through architecture built under his name. He could not override commands issued in his own voice. He stood in the middle of the moon court in red moonlight, with the power gone and the people falling around him. He stood very still. He looked at Elara. She was standing at the edge of the witness circle, holding the black crown, watching him. She was not gloating. She was not frightened. She was waiting, not for him to command something, waiting to see if he would understand what was being asked of him. He walked toward her. He walked slowly through the hall where his wolves were kneeling against their will, and his council was collapsing, and the machinery of his authority was being used to destroy the people it was supposed to protect. He reached Elara. He knelt, not from ceremony. Not from performance, not from the practiced grace of public gesture. He knelt the way a man kneels when the alternative is claiming to stand when he cannot, and the lie would be visible to everyone. He said, before the entire moon court, before every pack elder, before the nobles and the guards and the corrupted wolves struggling against their own ribs. The knee I forced her to bend was carrying my kingdom. The court went completely still, he said. I called her corruption because I was afraid to name what my command had become, he said. I believed the men who made silence sound like victory, he said. I made my Luna kneel for wounds she was healing. The war command binding cracked, not completely, but enough. Because curses built on command lose their certainty when the commander stops pretending the command was righteous. Elara looked down at him. She said, I do not return to the throne. She placed the black crown on her own head. I stand for the wolves your throne stopped hearing. The crown flared, black shifting to silver shifting to something between them that had no proper color, a light that was not absence and was not triumph, but was something that felt like truth being made visible. She turned to the wolves who were still fighting the binding. She did not command them, she said. Speak. A long silence, then one voice. A soldier named something he had carried since the eastern border. His wolf exhaled audibly. Then another. A widow named the grief that had been sealed away when it would have made the command frequency inconvenient. Then another. A guard named the orders he had obeyed that still visited him at night. A pup who had never been in a battle named only that he was afraid and did not know why. Each named word was a thread pulled from the binding. The corruption in the pack link did not vanish. It drained. Slowly. The way genuine wounds drain when the pressure that has been sealing them is finally released. It took a long time. Ronan remained kneeling until the last voice was heard. He did not rise until Elara stepped back from the center. He did not speak until she had finished. Veyron tried to invoke one final emergency statute. The pack elders, who had watched lower wolves speak freely for the first time in years, did not move to support him. Dane placed a hand on Veyron's arm. He was arrested. The blood moon began to fade. Ronan's wolf returned, not as command, quietly, like something that had been waiting outside a door and had finally been invited in. The court expected Elara to put the silver Luna crown back on. She set the black crown in the center of the public hall instead. She placed it on a low stone platform where anyone could see it. She said, "This is not shame. This is record." She said the black crown would remain in the hall until the laws were changed. The reform took 6 weeks. Ronan repealed the Luna humiliation law and every emergency command provision that had allowed war command binding to run without oversight. No Luna could be forced to kneel before proof. Crown surrender could not happen before independent trial. A Luna had the right to speak before any court judgment. Emergency command required healer oversight and consent counsel. Grief suppression was banned. Lower-ranked wolves could testify against command abuse. Packlink punishment was classified as treason. War command records had to be made public within 30 days of battle. Auriel led the recovery treatment program. Dane began training guards to recognize command trauma in themselves and in others. Marielle left court politics. She began working with Auriel on noble contract abuses in smaller pack territories. Elara oversaw the Packlink Healing Council. She did not take the Luna title back. She was not asked to, which was itself part of the law reform. The title had to be offered, not assumed. Ronan found her in the public hall one evening, standing beside the black crown. He said, "I thought your knees proved my authority." Elara looked at the crown. They proved your fear, she said. He said. I know, he said. Where do I stand? She looked at him. Where you can hear the wolves you stopped hearing. He accepted that. He did not push for more. A month later, when the first formal healing ceremony was held for command-abused wolves, Ronan came without his crown and without guards. He stood at the edge of the gathering and waited to be told where to place himself. He had stopped assuming. That was new. Elara was at the center. At one point he moved forward, following the instinct of a man used to leading. She stopped. Beside me, she said. Or not at all. He stepped back. He looked at the space beside her. He came level with her. Beside, he said. They stood there together while the wolves named what they had been carrying. No mate mark, no ceremony, no forgiveness declared aloud. Only the specific quality of presence that two people have when they have survived something together and are learning, very carefully, what the next thing is. The process was slow. It was supposed to be slow. Some things needed to move at the speed of actual healing rather than the speed of wanting to be healed. Months later, the black crown still stood in the hall. Lower-ranked wolves came to leave written testimonies beneath it. The papers accumulated until they covered the base of the platform entirely. Names, dates, commands received, grief swallowed, pain carried in silence. This was the record Elara had been keeping all along. Now it was visible to everyone. A young Omega soldier was brought before the Reformed Council. He had refused a direct battle command. Old law would have punished him for disobedience. New law required understanding why. The council looked to Elara. Elara looked at Ronan. Ronan was silent. The soldier looked at the room. He looked at the papers beneath the black crown. He said, I refused because the command asked me to hurt someone I knew. The court was quiet. Elara said, That is testimony. She looked at the council. Write it into the record. The council wrote, No one was punished that day. The soldier walked out of the hearing room on his own terms, which had not been a possibility under the old law. Elara watched him go. Ronan watched Elara watch him. Neither of them said anything. There was nothing that needed to be said. The work was the saying. The Alpha King once forced his Luna to kneel because he thought she was weakening him. But when her crown turned black, the kingdom learned the truth. She had been carrying the wounds his throne was too afraid to hear.